If you've ever experienced psychological horror, you're familiar with the uncanny feeling that it leaves you with. A weird state, somewhere almost between grief and pure terror. With that being said, have you ever wondered what happens when psychological horror reaches its breaking point? When a game truly finds a way to disturb the player like nothing else has? I've played a lot of horror games in the past, but none of them accomplish this quite like the RPG Maker game Omori. A game that prides itself around its immense hidden meanings, its unnerving creature and level designs, and the way it will trick you into thinking that everything is going to be okay, only to all of a sudden be thrown into a traumatic nightmare. Welcome, I'm Mr. Mirage, and today we will be taking a journey through the nearly 24 hours of playtime that is Omori, and trying my best to compress all of its psychological complexity into one manageable video. Obviously, there will be spoilers, as well as a trigger warning for self-harm and mental illness. You have been warned. Omori, like many other psychological horror games, has a very unique way of making you feel uneasy and uncomfortable. You can immediately tell that something doesn't seem right, even in the less scary parts of the game. The name Omori itself derives from the Japanese word Hikikomori, otherwise known as a shut-in or recluse. This is the unfortunate circumstance that our main character Sunny has found himself in, although I did name him Mirage on my playthrough. Between locking himself away for years and barely being able to eat or speak, it is quite obvious, even from the beginning, that something is seriously mentally wrong with our main character. And if that wasn't enough, it becomes apparent that Sunny is being followed. With his mother being away, it is announced that Sunny is planned to be moving in 3 days, which is when the game takes place. And as for where, the game is split into two main sections, Sunny's reality and inside of Sunny's mindscape, playing as his dream world alter ego, Omori, along with the people closest to him, his friends Basil, Aubrey, Kel, and Hiro, along with his older sister, and sort of another figure to the group, Mari. This is Whitespace, an empty void that will serve as the first layer to Sunny's mindscape. You will awake here whenever Sunny falls asleep, and it is here you are first introduced to Omori. You've lived here as long as you can remember, but where exactly is here? In Whitespace, all you can see around you is a laptop, a journal, and a tissue box, lit only by a single black light bulb that appears to be hanging from nothing. Should you attempt to leave through anywhere other than the single door, you will be caught by red hand-like creatures and brought back to the center. Not that it matters though, as even if you do manage to escape them, you'll find yourself back to where you started. The computer contains a repetitive, meaningless diary log, and the journal is home to many odd drawings, some worse than others. Anything different in here? Just... Alright, that's a little new. Eventually, the door will be able to be opened, and once you exit Whitespace, you can now access the main layer known as Headspace, and head to the park with your friends. Basil will seem very interested in showing us his photo album and some of his garden, as they're his main interests. So far, Sunny's dream seems to be a safe space where he can relive peaceful memories with his friends. That is, until it isn't. Well, that's new. After returning to Whitespace, we realize that we are no longer allowed to leave, leaving us with only one choice. In Omori, it is made clear that the reality is much more harsh than the dream world that we dive into. The first time we actually get to explore our house is extremely unsettling, with Sunny clearly starving but not being able to eat for an unknown reason. He soon becomes dizzy and collapses back into his bed, but instead of returning to the dream world, we wake up an unknown amount of time later to find out something is different about our house. It is obvious that whether it is due to extreme hunger or something different, Sunny is experiencing extreme hallucinations, envisioning a long staircase where he is confronted by the unknown entity that is referred to as Something, who is a haunting creature with many forms, inferred to be a physical manifestation of Sunny's traumas and fears. Throughout the game, we will see many of these characters confront Sunny in his house as his hallucinogenic episodes become more and more frequent. As the game goes forward, these, along with creatures appearing in the mirrors, will be a harsh reminder of Sunny's mental instability. This encounter will be interrupted by a knocking at the door, claiming to be your sister Mari. Eventually, day will arrive, and you will be greeted by your friend Kel and asked to come outside. If you decide to accept this request, you will get your first glimpse of Faraway Town, which you immediately realize is much different than how you would remember. And instead of your friends mirroring your dream, they are all very broken versions of their former selves, seeming to all be recovering from something as well. So, what happened? When we first see Aubrey, she has stolen Basil's photo album and is confronting him in the park. If we weren't already convinced something is terribly wrong, rather than talking it out with her, Sunny will suddenly attack Aubrey with a kitchen knife, injuring her and causing everyone except Basil and Kel to leave the area. We then notice that Basil also has something off with him, immediately wanting to go home, then breaking down into tears about his stolen photos. When we eventually confront Aubrey to retrieve them, she reveals to the player the dark reason why everyone is so on edge and so different. It is revealed that Mari, Sunny's older sister, is dead. When taking part in Headspace, the majority of the game is structured like a normal RPG, fighting bosses and using abilities and items to find a strategy to make it through the game. Most of Headspace, as mentioned before, are versions of things that Sunny sees in real life, for example coming into contact with characters such as Spaceboy and Sweetheart, who in real life are a fictional character and a pop star. After returning to Headspace after the prologue, it is revealed that Basil hasn't been seen since we last were here, and everyone is very worried on what might have happened to him, starting the fetch quest that we will see distract us throughout the majority of our time in Headspace. It is worth noting that Mari, Sunny's older sister, is always staying behind, showing that in Sunny's ideal dream world, he wants all of his friends to get along and his older sister to be safe. Omori is seen to be noticeably different from all the other characters, having no color to him and staying silent throughout the game. As we look for Basil, the group becomes more concerned as we cross more locations off the list, and he is still nowhere to be found. On top of this, you view your laptop in Whitespace, and it now contains a hangman puzzle, with keys marked with bloodstained steps now strewn across the map. But the message is unknown until we are able to collect more keys. Although the group doesn't find any traces of Basil, Omori will occasionally come into contact with the Stranger, who is a shadow that resembles Basil and will lead Omori into various hidden rooms and pathways. As mentioned before, Sunny is revealed to have 4 main fears: heights, spiders, drowning, and while initially limited by these fears, with the help of Mari and your friends, you will slowly overcome them. Well, most of them. It isn't until after we conquer 3 of Sunny's fears that the dream world begins to change. You awaken once again in Whitespace, but when going to look for your friends, they are no longer waiting for you. The door to Whitespace will close behind you, revealing something has locked you out. What is going on here? When you exit the main room, you realize a thick fog has enveloped Headspace and only Mari remains in the northern section, and will help Omori cross the lake. Mari is acting different, as instead of addressing him as Omori, she will address him as Sunny for the first time in the game. She will mention that he still has one fear that he has to get over, that he must confront something and stop running from it. She will then give an emotional goodbye and leave through a window. Now, I have my own theory on this, but I'll save it for the analysis part of the video. When you find your friends, they have completely forgotten what they were doing and have found themselves stuck in a weird and corrupt casino working a job. After freeing them, we find out they've forgotten they were looking for Basil entirely, with none of them even remembering exactly how he looks. Despite this, the group will rely on Omori to keep them focused as we continue deeper into the abyss. I found this section to be a lot more disturbing than the others because it emphasizes just how long we've been searching for Basil, and how After a while, even the people that were his best friends, that were previously crying and so upset about his disappearance, are forgetting him entirely, and that realization is chilling. And it's minor details like that that make Omori such a subtly disturbing game. Eventually, after venturing into the deep well, Omori will spot the stranger swinging from a branch coral, only for them to disappear once again. However, this tree has a lot more of an impact than you might think, as you will have the ability to gain advice from it by asking about different topics. If you ask it about Basil, it'll tell you that he was reborn somewhere else, and no longer resides in this layer of headspace. And the only reason that you have been able to see him as a stranger is that Sunny and Basil are linked to what it refers as a string of fate. And to retrieve him, you must remove yourself from headspace as well, and mentions the journey is nearing its end. I'll go into his other lines later in the video, but for now that's the only one that matters. He will then offer you a sacrifice which, if accepted, will send you into a blood-red room with a tree that bears a fruit that will transform into your head, and when grabbed and eaten, will give you a permanent boost in stats. Eventually, we meet one of the most disturbing characters in the game, a whale named Humphrey, who at first seems docile and welcomes us to meet the sea witches that live inside of him. We then realize that he has an entire area inside of him, and we spend an entire section exploring the inside of the whale. Eventually, we are confronted by the sea witches because one of the characters that we briefly mentioned earlier, Sweetheart, scammed them out of their services, and when asked for a payment, passed it on to us, then ran off. We see now Humphrey become the most terrifying version of himself, as we find that he is only docile when the witches keep him fed, and since no one can afford to do that, he starts to mention that he is becoming more and more hungry, and then eventually can no longer control his hunger. We then have to try and find a way out, as the walls literally are closing in on us, requiring us to go through a long and disturbing boss fight that will end with us being forced out and gaining the last 2 keys. We now can finally complete the puzzle, and with it, we receive the chilling message, "Welcome to Blackspace." After this message is received, the game truly starts to go off the deep end. Sunny's dream world, as mentioned before, is multi-layered, with Whitespace assumably being the first layer that we always spawn into, Headspace being the neutral middle layer, and finally the vast darkness surrounding it all, known by Blackspace. Blackspace is assessed by a newly opened pit in what is left of Basil's house. Upon approaching it, your friends become extremely unnerved, and at this point it was clear that I was going to have to continue alone. Blackspace at first glance appears to be a pitch black version of Whitespace, containing a similar notebook, laptop, and tissues. Many doors line the void, each leading to their own twisted version of Sunny's memories, where we can discover many corrupted creatures, including some we are familiar with. This section has no particular order and gives very similar vibes to Yuiniki. In each section, you must navigate around until you find the hidden key, then red hands will appear and bring you back to the main area. Along with various creatures, you will also come into contact with both the stranger and Basil, along with, of course, random encounters with something. Eventually, you will make it to another odd room, where you will find Basil being engulfed in darkness, who will beg you to save him, and despite your choice, he will be dragged through what appears to be the back door of Sunny's house. It is becoming clear to the player that we are spiraling towards a brutal end, but we are still unaware what truly happened to Mari, and we really don't know what is truly causing this torment in Sunny, nor what Basil has to do with it. But Blackspace is leaking through the cracks, and with this, we are coming closer to discovering the truth behind all of it. As not only did we just witness the Basil inside of Sunny's mindscape being murdered by Omori, the real life version seems to be doing just as bad, as we see him be pushed into the lake by Aubrey, putting him in critical condition. I think it's worth mentioning that I was much more worried about Basil than Sunny most of the game, as he showed much more obvious signs of depression and mental illness, but we don't really get an answer why, other than a hint that he has some sort of connection with Sunny, as we see this time and time again throughout different cutscenes as the game progresses. It is also curious that along with Sunny, Basil is being haunted by his own something, except his is much larger and appears to be devouring him, which to me seems like it represents that he is in more distress than Sunny is. When the rest of the newly reunited group begins to take notice of this, they will stay over at his house and wait for him to come out. But similar to in Blackspace, Sunny is going to have to confront Basil alone. To this point, we have seen Sunny over and over again try to mask his reality by going into his dreams. But as many people are familiar with, Blackspace is the reality, what Headspace has been covering this entire time. And we see Sunny finally starting to accept this, facing his final fear. Rather than playing as Omori and walking up in Whitespace, we see Sunny himself shatter the light bulb and willingly re-enter Blackspace. Something I haven't exactly covered is how while conquering his fears, Sunny develops new ways in order to deal with them, and in this encounter with something, you will have to use them all, eventually leading incoming face-to-face with your final fear, the truth about Omori. This entire time, it never really made any sense. None of it did. Omori had no reason to end her own life, and everyone knew it, but it is here we find an explanation for it all. Why Sunny has been plagued with guilt, and why he isolated himself from the world, and why both him and Basil are plagued by constant hallucinations for the years following. It's because, in reality, Omori didn't end her own life. Rather, in a fit of rage, Sunny had pushed her down the stairs, ending the life of his only sister, and in turn, giving birth to the creature that had been haunting him this entire game. Some of the hardest times for people can be watching themselves drift apart from someone that they shared so many great memories with. And while being mostly in the background, we see little hints that Mari, being much older than Sunny, started to become more and more busy, forcing Sunny to have to pick up one of her hobbies, being playing an instrument, as an excuse to spend time with her again. Despite this, he would come to despise the violin, as Mari was an extremely strict teacher to him. Eventually, this pressure would lead to a fight between them, where Omori would be shoved way too close to a staircase, inevitably leading to a snapped neck and her death, just in time for Basil to walk in the door to witness it. Understandably, Basil would refuse to believe Sunny would do anything like this on purpose, so he would help him frame it as a suicide to save his best friend. He just couldn't have done something like this on purpose. Something must have been behind him that made him do it. Something, right? I was understandably taken aback by this development, but we can now understand why Sunny and Basil seem so damaged compared to his other friends, because all around them, wherever they went, all they could see was that one image stained into their head. With this in mind, I now realize that Basil, having been abandoned by Sunny for 4 years and forced to suffer completely alone, and with the knowledge that Sunny would be moving away forever, would be on the edge of doing something drastic. And when we decide to confront Basil in his room, our suspicions are confirmed as he is holding a pair of garden shears and being engulfed by his something. Sunny, terrified once more, tries to again leave Basil, but instead is forced into an altercation by his something, ending with both boys being sent to the hospital. It is here we see Sunny enter Headspace for the final time, once again encountering Basil and Mari, who are both encouraging him to forgive himself and to finally admit to his friends what he has done, leading him to retrieve the same violin that he broke that fateful night, the night he couldn't handle all the pressure to perform and let it take control of his life. But no matter how hard Sunny attempts to play the solo, he still hasn't completely gotten over his guilt, breaking down in tears over Omori and returning him to Whitespace, where Omori is waiting for him. Rather than being the playable silent character from before, we see Omori now for what he really is, a way for Sunny to hide from his past, and despite believing it was something, Omori is representing Sunny's guilt and his inability to let go of his final fear. In the final boss fight, Omori will weaponize this and berate Sunny with more and more guilt until he's overwhelmed and inevitably beaten. It is here the player is given their final choice. Do they want Sunny to succumb to his guilt, to his trauma, or will he learn to overcome and keep living? After Omori has finally faded away, we see Sunny wake up in the hospital and finally admit to his friends what him and Basil had done. And although we won't see their reaction, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that Sunny learned to forgive himself, so he can finally move forward and begin his life again, finally free of something. Now, if you're familiar with this channel, I usually don't go too much into lore as I always tend to miss something, but I'm still going to go over a couple theories and secret dialogue that could contribute to the overall storyline. Number 1. Branch Coral. Omori contains a lot of secret characters, each with dialogue that hints more into the secrets of Blackspace. The main one I'm going to go over is Branch Coral, as briefly touched on earlier, is found in Deeper Well and gives the player knowledge. And while we already went over the one for Basil, he also offers knowledge about 3 great creatures, possibly representing pillars of Sunny's memories and things he enjoyed in real life. Humphrey being the oldest, Abby being known as the wisest, who is a character from the game's alternate route who remains only in Blackspace, and the favorite being the cat that we see guarding the headspace equivalent of Sunny's treehouse, each having their own roles to play in protecting Sunny from the truth, as for many years, that was what he wanted. He also contains a line about Whitespace, stating existing in it is to be nothing, and it is only a place to survive, but not to live, as possibly to allude that although Sunny could have hid from the truth in Whitespace forever, and technically could have survived, it wasn't a way to truly live, as it was based in an illusion, and Sunny would be running from the truth, living in misery forever. Number 2, the Hikikomori. As shown throughout the game, Omori's entire purpose was to block out the real world and to save Sunny from his trauma taking too much of a toll on him, as we see many times in cutscenes, Sunny succumbing to darkness and being saved and then absorbed into Omori. However, when that starts to change, when after 4 years Sunny finally decides to stop letting Omori cover up the truth and instead breaks the light bulb, this is when Omori becomes hostile, when he tries desperately to convince Sunny to keep hiding the truth, that is too painful to overcome, and to just let him win and stay in Whitespace. Omori is meant to represent the voice inside of his head that some of us may be all too familiar with, which is why, no matter the outcome of the battle, it is left up to the player to decide whether Sunny deserves, or more like decides, to keep living, for his friends and for Omori. This is further shown by the game's alternate route, where rather than reuniting with your friends, you stay inside, seeing yourself become more and more like Omori, having a much different outcome. If y'all want me to go more into the depth in the Hikikomori route, like and comment down below, and if I get enough requests, I'll make another video focusing on it. Number 3. Mari. Now, if you remember back to right before we entered the Abyss, when Mari spoke to Sunny rather than Omori, I believe this was the actual spirit of Mari talking to him. Now, hear me out. When you are learning to recover from your fears and trauma, each time we will see a voice will guide you to find a way to overcome it. I believe that this is the real Mari, and that the Mari that we see throughout the entire game in Headspace is simply a fabricated memory made by Sunny so he can see her stay safe. It's also worth mentioning how depressing the final animatic was. Like, why do psychological horror games always have to end with songs and cutscenes that rip your heart out? But despite this, I really enjoyed the experience of playing through Omori, even though it gave me a similar uncomfortable feeling to when I was playing DDLC. But if you enjoy these types of games, I definitely suggest checking out Omori for yourselves.
Well, that was quite an adventure. I'm sad to see you go, but don't worry, this doesn't have to be the last time we see each other. I got another cool video, just for you. Hurry, the video's almost over.